Hey guys, it's Derek Z. Welcome back to another video. This video is going to be primarily focusing on exercises to help correct your knocked knees. Knocked knees, or what we call Genu Valgum, is a lower extremity deformity in which the knees come together, in which creates space on the lower part of your legs. So your knees basically collapse inward, and then when people are walking, they're putting their alignment out of position, which then essentially can create osteoarthritis down the road, speeds that process up. There's multiple reasons for knocked knees happening. Majority of the time, sometimes there's weakness in the hip, in which makes the knee fall inward. Sometimes there's tightness in the ankle. If you're flat feet, that puts you in a position to have knocked knees or genu valgus more. It can also come from arthritis that's developed within the knees, changing the position of the knee joint itself, which then causes a collapse in. You can also be born with it, so it can be congenital, and of course trauma. So if you're any high velocity trauma like car accident, that can also change the alignment of the knee. If you're someone who already has knocked knees or genu valgus of the knees, then what happens is it can usually becomes more apparent when you go down to a squat or anytime when you're bending your knee with load. A lot of times what happens is when you squat, the knees kind of cave in. There's a moment at which you squat down and it does this. So when it goes in, the most severe ones, I have a patient right now when she squats down and it just caves straight in. She's mentioning that if they feel more stable when the knee is caved in that way. So usually when that occurs, a lot of times there's weakness that's coming from the hip. So we need to strengthen that in the opposite direction. If you're going down deep into a squat and you can't go any further and your foot has to cave in order for you to create the squat, so that's actually a limitation that's coming from the ankle. So if the ankle is limited in what we call ankle dorsiflexion, meaning it's limited in this angle, so the body will try to create a compensation by caving in on the foot going into what we call pronation. So once the foot caves in, it automatically puts the knee in valgum in order for you to complete the motion. So the body will sacrifice quality of motion for quantity of motion. So a lot of times what we'll do to correct that is to increase mobility in your ankle or strengthen the hip or do both, in which I'll talk about in a little bit. Some people naturally have genu valgum of their knees because it's congenital and they're born with it, but some of these positions are not the best for your hip, knee, and your ankle, mainly because it puts the muscles in a non-optimal position. So when you're going into a squat and your knees are caving in, it's a lot harder for your hip, knee, or your ankle to engage to push yourself back up. So the calf muscle is out of alignment here, mainly because the knee is already out of alignment since the calf attaches to the back. The hip has to work harder to power itself back out to put itself into alignment. And then it just puts a ton of stress on your knees when you're doing this. So you can try it yourself. You can squat regular, making sure your knees are aligned with your toes, and then you can squat with the knees going inward. It just puts more pressure. You feel there's more stress on the knee, especially if your knee's already sensitized and there's already a little bit of knee pain. It's going to cause it to hurt a little bit more. So that's why it's more optimal, especially if you're doing any sporting activities that requires powering off the lower body. It's more optimal to just put everything into alignment for power generation. I'm going to show you a few exercises that involve strengthening the hip, because we need to strengthen the hip in the abduction position and external rotation, because genu valgum puts the hip into internal rotation and adduction, which then puts it into midline. And we're going to go ahead and get some exercises for the quad, because that will help you strengthen up the knee, and then also some exercises to address the ankle stiffness, especially if you're limited in ankle dorsiflexion. So if those three are all, if the hip, knee, and the ankle are all addressed properly, then that should allow you and give you the range of motion to be in proper alignment so you can be out of genu valgum. So the first exercise to help you work on your hips into external rotation and strengthening the core along with that is a power clam. So a power clam is basically a regular clam, but you go into a side plank with it. So you're in the side plank position, or at least a modified side plank position. So your elbows, your hips, and your knee is in as much of a straight line as possible when you start off with. So usually when people do a side plank, people have the hip forward or your knee forward, which then puts you in a bit of a hip flexion angle. That's incorrect, because when you're doing this, the side plank is a lot more easier. And when you do the actual clam from this position, you're already out of alignment. So you want shoulder, hip, and knee in one line. Pop up from there because you want to be in a side plank. A side plank is supposed to be straight. And then from there, you open up, put a band around your knee so you get a little bit of resistance. I usually have my folks do this for 10 seconds, 10 times. So here we're strengthening the hip into external rotation. So if you can't do the power clam, the modification would just be a regular clam to start off with. So there's 2 exercises that make up for the power clam. It's a leg raise called the Sidelying Hip Abduction, and just the regular clam. So with the regular clam, you lay on your side. Alignment for the regular clam, you can either have it a little bit straight or about 45 degrees, kind of in between of where your hips are. So this would be a little bit straight. This would be about 45 degrees, just not all the way up here. So you want to start somewhere a little bit straight and at 45 degrees. And then from there, your knees are together. You still have the band. Your feet is together. And then you just pop up. You just do the part where you strengthen your glute if the side plank is hard to hold. Same thing, 10-second holds, and you do this for about 10 times. And then when you're doing these exercises, make sure you do it on both sides as well. The next exercise that will make up for the power clams is the Sidelying Hip Abduction. So basically it's a leg raise. You lay on your side. Again, we're working on the left side. Bottom leg is bent. Top leg is straight. When you lift this leg up, make sure it's not forward, because if you lift it forward, we're using part of our hip flexors to do that. You want it either straight or back. So back is actually a little bit better than straight, because then you're really trying to bias and focus the strengthening part on the glute. So what you want to do is make sure it's a little bit either straight or back, and then lift it up and back. So you're going that way. So when you're doing this, you almost, if you're looking down, you almost can't see your knee because it's going away from your line of vision. So if you're doing this and you can see your leg, you're likely flexing your hip. So if that's the case, you're working on your hip flexors, which is not what we want to do. You want to work on your glutes to help you extend and abduct your leg to prevent the Genu Valgum from happening. Therefore, it won't be collapsing in. Usually when I have people do this, this is not like a hold for 10. It's about repetitions here. So this is about 2 sets of 15 is what I have people do. So you know you're doing it right if you feel the burn kind of right up in the hip by your side and a little bit in your quad. A banded lunge to push the knee into the valgus position, so you're more aware of how to correct it, would be the next exercise. So usually I just call this the banded lunge. I tie the knot to something stable. I just wrap it around this my staircase over here, and then I step all the way out. I have my patient step all the way out, so much that when they relax the leg that's being pulled on, it becomes a knocked knee position. So it goes into valgus. So the exercise here is actually, you're trying to engage the glute, squeeze it, bring it out so your knee is aligned with your second toe, and then go into a lunge as you hold that position. So slow and control, making sure the glute is engaged on that left side as you're doing this exercise by pushing it out. So we're going into abduction and external rotation of the hip to prevent the Genu valgus from happening. So this is a nice exercise for you to be self-aware of where your knee is in space, because the band is essentially pushing you into the position that you do not want to be, which is valgus. So when I have people do this, usually it's about 10 times on each side. And if you get a little bit better at this, you can go up to 20, or you can just have a band that's stronger. If the banded lunge is an exercise that's too hard for you to do, or it's creating pain and dysfunction within your leg or anywhere else in the hip, knee, or ankle region, then what you can do is do a banded squat as a modification. So you just start with your legs a little bit wider than your shoulder width apart, put a band right above the knee, because this band will still push you into the valgus position. So the goal for you is to push this out to create optimal alignment, so your knees are over your ankle or in line with your toes. And then from there, make sure you apply that tension on it and then still go into the squat. So this is an excellent exercise I typically have people start off with before they go into the lunge, or if they can't do the banded lunge, because a lot of times, especially if you're somebody who already is in a knocked knee position, and when you squat, your knees cave in, this is a nice one to prevent that at that angle completely. So you're basically just trying to be aware and self-correct this while you're going into a squat. And when I have people do this, again, it's slow and control for about 10 times, because it's more of a neuromuscular exercise. The lateral step down is another nice exercise to help you realign yourself as the knee is collapsing in, because there's a balance component that goes into it. We're loading the leg that is weak. Ideally, most of the time when we're knocked knees, it's weak on both sides. So you do this on the other side. So when we're doing this, you just need a step, or you need a box. This box is about 6 inches in height. To make the exercise easier, you can lower the box or just find a shorter step. And then to make it harder, you just increase the height of the step. So the exercise looks like this. It's essentially a mini single leg squat. So when you're doing this, it's not about pumping out reps when we're doing this, because you need to be aware of where your knee is in space when we're loading it. So especially if you're somebody who kind of caves in, like we was talking about at first, when you're doing this, very crucial to not have that happen, because that's actually dynamic valgus right there at that moment in time. So when you're doing this, come back up onto the step. Make sure, or try hard to have your knee be in line with your toes, and then tap the heel on the opposite side on the ground, and then come right back up, maintaining proper alignment the entire time while you're doing this exercise, making sure that doesn't happen. Don't push off and come up from a valgus position, because that puts a lot of stress onto the knees. Make sure the knee is in line with those toes, and then you're coming up from there. This is a slow and control exercise when you're doing this. Like I said at first, not pumping out reps. I usually have my folks do this 10 times, just slow and control. A self-joint mobilization to improve ankle dorsiflexion, which is this motion right here that is required in squatting. This is a nice one to help improve that motion, especially if you have some joint stiffness that's in the ankle. So what you need with this is a power band, or a pretty strong resistant band that will loop around the ankle. When you're putting this around the ankle, make sure it's below your ankle bones. So to help find that, it's pretty straightforward. So if you take your hand and slide it down, you're gonna come across 2 bumps on the outside and on the inside. So the first bumps on the inside and the outside are your ankle bones. So you want to make sure the band is underneath that. We call these the medial malleoli on the inside and the lateral malleoli on the outside. So when you're doing this, make sure the band is below the malleoli. Okay, so you know when it's kind of looped through, you should be able to still feel your ankle bones, and the band should be underneath that. So that's where your ankle joint is. Okay, so you want to move this forward so much that there's a good amount of resistance on the band. So the exercise itself is you're just sliding your knee forward into ankle dorsiflexion, and the band is pushing the ankle joint backwards. This is a nice self-joint mobilization to help with ankle dorsiflexion, to improve it. what you can do is at the end range, you get to a point where you feel like that's tight. Hold it there for a couple seconds, apply a little bit of overpressure here, and then move back out of it. So I usually have my folks do this 10 to 20 times, couple second hold, and then back, depending on how tight you are. If you're more tight, 20 times. If you're not as tight, then about 10 times. You'll feel this when you're doing this. The goal is to be able to get past neutral and make sure your heel does not come off. If your heel comes off, then you basically lose the stretch. So make sure the entire foot stays flat. A lot of tension on this band, rocking forward, going back, holding it at the end for a little bit, just a couple seconds, and then coming out of it. Ankle dorsiflexion can be limited if your ankle joint is stiff in self, so meaning if the bones need to move. If that is the case, the self-joint mobilization, what I showed from before, is what will address that. A lot of times that may not be the case, so if that's not the case, a lot of times it can be if you have a tight calf. So you can either massage this out or you can foam roll it out. I like a self-active release technique on the foam roll. So essentially what you're doing is you prop both your calf on the foam roll, and then you push yourself up with both your hands, and then you roll back and forth on the foam roll. There will come a time where if you have tight calves, especially if you have tight calves, you will roll over a trigger point. And it's going to be sore, or it's going to be that point where it hurts so good. You hold it there, okay? Make sure you apply the pressure there. So this is like a self trigger point release. And then what you'll do is you move the calf, or you move the ankle up and down. So you move it up, hold it there into ankle dorsiflexion, couple seconds, and then you point it down, hold it there for a couple seconds. This is kind of like a self-active release when you're doing this, especially if you're applying pressure. So for me, there's tension, it's tight, it's tender, right at this point on both sides actually. So this is where I'll floss this muscle, point it down for a couple seconds, bring it up for a couple seconds, and then you move on to the next trigger point. And you just keep rolling yourself up and down. So right there is another one for me. Feel it on the outside, and then you do the same thing. Point it up, and then you push it down. You point it up, and then you push it down, and then you move on to the next one. I usually have people go up and down probably about like 2 to 5 minutes at a time before we progress to the next exercise. Since all of our joints are connected throughout the rest of our body, you always want to look above and below. So if the issue manifests in the knee, in which this case it's knock knees, you always want to look at the hip and you always want to look at the ankle. These are exercises that address essentially both the hip, the ankle, and the knee. So you want to look at the entire leg to fix what's the issue, which is essentially knock knees. So these are things that we always have to take into consideration when we're trying to treat a condition. These are all the exercises that I have for you. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave in the comment section below. And thank you for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video.